think many of you probably have gone out and looked at what it might cost to buy one or even bought one. And they're not the kind of thing you can just spend money on indiscriminately. But the good ones really do work. I think that's the important message here. So I was at my friend's house recently. She's been given a filter called a Blue Air filter. No endorsement implied here, just that's the filter she's happy to have. And so I have a little particle counter here. That's this, and it's a low-cost, $300, fairly non-scientific device that counts the particles in the air. And when we turned on that filter and closed the doors in the room that we were in, and just let the filter run for about half an hour, the concentrations dropped by a factor of 10 or maybe a factor of 20 of small particles that contribute part of the mass of PM2.5. And I thought that was fantastic. I'll take a factor of 10 reduction any time of day or night. It may not be good compared to what the perfect standard is, but 10 times better than what's outdoors, so it's really a good thing. I'm just looking at the levels inside here right now, and they're actually, it doesn't measure. One of the pitfalls of this instrument is it doesn't measure in real physical units. It measures in sort of a kooky unit that doesn't really make much sense to me, but so the relative levels are really just what I follow. And the relative levels in the house I'm staying in right now were about 4 times higher than in this room. And so for whatever reason, it maybe having to do with the air handling system in this building, this room is actually not so bad by absolute standards. It probably could be a factor of 4 lower still with a really good air cleaning system, but it's not horrible, which I'm very glad to see. One thing you really need to do if you get an air filter for your home is make sure you've got a good one. And I'm not the right person to ask about sort of what makes a really good air filter or what recommendations there are out there. But one thing you really want to be aware of are filters that are air cleaners that are actually not filters, but are called ion generators. So they use a very clever principle, which is they generate huge amounts of ions that charge particles in the air. The particles get stuck together and then they actually fall out because they grow in size to large enough that they come out of the air. So that's a really effective way to remove particles from the air, but the problem is that those types of cleaners are big sources of ozone. You don't want to be breathing high levels of ozone indoors. So you're trading one problem for another with those air cleaners. So I wouldn't recommend an ion type air cleaner. It's actually true that some large home air systems also have small ion generators in them to make their filters more effective. And those typically are not a problem, but basically what you want to do is get an air cleaner that has what's called a HEPA filter, H-E-P-A, that removes a very large fraction of the particles that pass through it. And you want to get one that's certified to produce low levels of ozone or no levels of ozone. So you don't want to trade the particle problem for an ozone problem. On the road, we've already talked about what to do on the road. Keep your windows closed, keep the air conditioning on, run the fan, and basically the physics of how this all works is that you want to minimize your air exchange with the outdoors, and what you want to do is give the particles, the way that particles are moved in indoor spaces is that the larger ones will settle to the ground by gravity, and the smaller ones are moved by diffusion to surfaces. So the more you stir up the air, the more you give the particles an opportunity to interact with the surface by diffusion or by gravitational settling. And so basically keeping the air really moving helps the particles get deposited, provided that you're not mixing more outdoor air in at the same time. So don't run your fan in outdoor air setting, because then you're actually just making your car more like a rickshaw where the air is really interacting with the outdoor air very well. And then, how about habits? So I would not exercise on a polluted morning. I'm going home tonight, and one of the reasons I'm looking forward to going home is that I feel like I can finally get some exercise. Because I don't feel comfortable personally exercising in heavy pollution episodes. Pollution tends to be higher at night and in the early morning here. So there's this sort of tension, which is that, especially in the summer, the middle of the afternoon is really kind of an awful time of day to be outside. But that is typically the time of day when levels are the lowest. What else did I want to say about this? Well, I think there's sort of this elephant in the room, right, about, should you let your kids, or should you personally spend your time, playing sports outside? And here I think one of the things that really can make a difference is just data. So knowing what the levels are at that instant when you're outside is probably a really useful thing to help guide your decision. So, you know, don't live in fear, but just look at the levels and then make your own judgment about the risks that you're comfortable with. So on relatively clean days in Delhi, it's probably much, much better to be playing outside than on you know, really polluted days. So I think that's just sort of the basic guidance I can offer. And of course, I also don't want air quality to rule anybody's life here. I mean, I think it's an important concern, but obviously there are other important things in one's life also. And then I wanted to comment one more thing about indoors versus outdoors. So you go back to the EPA, those EPA guidelines, and one of the things that they say is people should stay indoors because the air pollution levels are, you know, presumably lower indoors. That's sort of the idea behind that EPA statement is that, well, levels, don't go outside, come inside, because playing heavy activities outside is going to expose you to higher levels of pollution. Well, as I've already mentioned, many buildings in Delhi don't have very different levels indoors and outdoors, and that's really because they're so open to the outdoors that air comes in really readily. So the reason that the EPA guidance about indoors versus outdoors exists is that most American homes are much tighter and more centrally air conditioned, and that tends to reduce concentrations indoors. So if you want to follow the EPA guidance, you want to make sure that your indoor spaces are clean, and that's why air cleaners are so important. So I just want to summarize, and then we've got some time for questions. So air pollution is a big deal for health. I think we kind of all get that. That's why nobody showed up here. The monitoring data has a long way to go, but monitoring alone, of course, is not a solution to the problem. It just helps provide the basis for the problem. But one thing that I'm really excited about is putting more work into better understanding the air pollution outdoors, and monitoring is so important for that. Monitoring can also tell us about what the sources of air pollution are, so that's really important. The strategies for cleaning up the air in India are not rocket science at all. I think where innovation can make a difference is finding cheaper ways to clean up the air in India. And thankfully, there are so many low-hanging fruit here that can really help. And also, I think there's innovation in terms of coming up with new clever policies for reducing air pollution faster and cheaper than elsewhere. So sort of technical innovation and policy innovation are the opportunities here, but there's no real barrier in terms of like saying, oh, air pollution is too expensive to clean up. Because you can make huge strides without too much effort here, at least in the big picture. Air pollution is not important just in and of itself, but of course it has a big impact on health and on the climate, and there's really synergies here, so the policies that are really well designed ought to exploit all those synergies. And then finally, I feel like the US and scientists and people with professional expertise that touches any of these areas really have a lot to offer in India in terms of cleaning up the air. And so I encourage all of you to do what you can in your professional lives to help address this issue and find new opportunities for cleaning things up. And I'm really optimistic that we can solve this problem. But in the meantime, maybe we should hold our breath.
Okay, there we are. I had two choices to go out the back or come towards the front in case there might be some questions, because I think that along with questions to Dr. Apte, there's that piece of, okay, as a school, what do we do? What do we do with this? I literally, I was going to sort of make a joke about it, but the truth is I was thinking, well, I probably wouldn't take Dr. Apte along when I was doing faculty recruiting this year. And so, the point is the implications for life here for us in Delhi, and who's attracted to come here to teach your children, and what the implications are in a very practical sense for us. I mean, my mind immediately goes to, well, food festival on Saturday. Well, if it's 300 outside, do we do that? Do we say kids don't run around if they go? And then we're mad at them if they run around because it's not good for them? That kind of thing. So anyway, I kind of brought myself up front because I think we do have time for questions here. I hope you have more questions for Dr. Apte, but I just wanted to sort of make myself available, if you will, if you have some questions regarding the school and so on. Okay?
So people are starting to tell me that I'm like no fun to have at parties here, so I want to talk about air pollution. But really, any of you have questions? So all the way in the back, yeah.
I don't have a question, I have a request actually. So first of all, thank you very much for this great talk. It's really an eye-opener for us, and thanks Paul for doing this here. My request would be that in the near future we would have a real health epidemiologist here to follow up on that. Because one thing is whether you live on the street there. Another issue is, like for most of us, we are maybe a limited time here for a couple of years, or we are exposed for a limited time of the day. So the epidemiologists could really tell us how things go. For example, we know that lung cancer is, so if you stop smoking after a couple of years, lungs actually heal. So if we could have a follow-up on that, on the health impact with the implications of many of our situations, it may also clear up things, reduce anxieties and so on. That would be a good suggestion.
Great, and I realize I'm not helping here by giving you the engineering perspective with what I've learned from health scientists without really telling you. I have one more reaction to your comment, which is that I think that more data that we can collect here can help inform what we do. And then the other thing is about the short-term nature of your exposures. I think if there's the possibility of really, really controlling air pollution exposures indoors for many, many hours a day, that gives you sort of the headroom to maybe spend a little more time outdoors. Perhaps. I don't know the answer to that, but I would think that limiting, typically what we know about health effects is that they don't happen just in an instant, but sort of from your cumulative exposure over hours and days. So if you can reduce your exposure as much as possible, say when you're sleeping, that's going to help bring down your average exposure, and that gives you opportunities to have higher exposure other times. Somebody go.
Could you give more information on that filter? You said HEPA is...
HEPA. And there are a few people who provide HEPA filters here in Delhi. The local market is not strong. People mostly import filters at this point. There are a few different companies out there that do air quality services in Delhi, and some people can visit your home and make measurements and stuff like that. I'm not in a position to endorse any of them, but I know that they do exist, and that's probably a good resource.
Yeah. Soccer season starts Saturday, right? It's outdoors. So I saw that you had the N95 mask there. So if the kids that are playing outdoors wear the N95 mask, will that, I know they're running and sweating and stuff. I just know what to do. My daughter's a soccer player.
Right. And I played soccer too, so I very much sympathize with that question. I wish I could give you a good answer, and I don't know enough about these to really feel comfortable giving you an answer one way or another. I shouldn't be up in front of the room when talking about masks.
So basically, like, you don't do exercise during the high season. So
And, I mean, I don't live here full time, right? So I just try to limit my exposure when I'm here because I'm only here for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And I personally wouldn't, but that's my own decision, and that's not really based on any more information than you guys have.
I think it's kind of neglecting to think that that we don't have the long time exposure, and especially because we all have children that are developing their lungs and their health is exposed to that. So I think we all are in the long time exposure thing, and I'm very concerned about the kids being outside and doing sports when it's very much pollution outside. My son, he's playing soccer 5 times a week, and he's really getting headaches of that. And he's wearing the mask sometimes, but as many of the kids are not doing that, he's feeling uncomfortable. And we are going these discussions with the soccer groups and whatever. But also, I think the school should be following the, the index scale on that one, because 350 is the exposure rate at school that we're following here. But it already says at 150 that it should be reduced, the sports. So I would really like to have a discussion on this point.
And I wouldn't want to be the final authority on what levels are safe. I think you really should consult with an epidemiologist. But what that does point to is that maybe you want to be a little bit more cautious about what to be outside. Yeah.
Actually, I would like first to thank one member of the community, Lea, who is every year we provide children with iPads and computers. Could we have some action to provide every child with a mask at the beginning of the year? And make it mandatory for the children to wear, when the days are bad, to wear masks, and then no one would feel awkward that has to wear the mask. Maybe if we push them all, and no sound to get masks.
I'm a distributor for Valvac, which is a type of N99 mask, and I brought some here in case people want to see. But I'm the Valvac distributor in Delhi. I've been talking to the DSA. I can't make any decisions for the school, but I can be the go-between between the school or individual parents if the school doesn't decide to do a big policy between individual parents. And I completely agree with this. My sons were feeling super awkward about wearing these, and now that more people are wearing them, they're giving me almost no flack about wearing it, even my 9-year-old. So, and I can help with Paul in the school too.
Yeah, but what is the efficiency of the mask?
It's an N99, it's a 2.5, it's very well rated, and you get about, an average of about 200 hours of use in the heavy pollution. So my plan was to use one for the pollution season, and now that I've heard this talk, my plan is to use one for 2 months, throw it out, and get another one for the next 2 months, and then, yeah, we have extra small, medium, and large.
So Catherine, I think, really wants to say something.
I just wanted to respond to that. First, thank you very much for the information on the dog mask. We had a great meeting with Jen Chase, and Jen, could you stand up? Jen is the brain behind DelhiAir.org, which you saw up on Josh's slide earlier in the presentation, to get together with Beth Cotis. And we looked at some different options for a possible mask purchase. So I just wanted you all to know that we are actively considering this. We're sensitive to the community's concerns. My kids are also running around playing soccer outdoors. So, this is an immediate thing that we may be able to do to help alleviate the concerns. However, I will say that, when you're looking at a purchase for the school, right, you're talking about a whole lot of masks. There's cost associated with that. And so the disposable N95 masks seem to be the best bet, but I don't know if we found whether they're in fact locally available. Jen, I know we were doing some research on that. Maybe you can
So
address
we're
that.
still looking into that. There's lots of different masks that you can look at if you want to try that route. And as a public health professional, I feel like the take-home message is minimize your exposure, and there's lots of different ways to do that. So Leah has a type of mask that's N95, which is a certain kind of certification, or N99, which is even better. There are other kinds of masks also. I just want to say really quickly that I created this website. It's just an informational website, and it's based on primary research from organizations like the World Health Organization and the CDC, and there are Indian organizations like the Public Health Foundation of India. And there's lots of links. It's just a place to learn, and if you're interested. So it's called DelhiAir.org. There's lots of masks on it, there are filters on it, and discussions about what might work.
And there's a link to the U.S. Embassy website on the right column where you can check what the level is at any hour.
Excuse me.
You want to ask another question?
Hi, my name is Arjun. I'm a student in the high school here. Thank you very much for the meeting. I know there's a lot of concern in the high school among students about the air quality. So I was wondering if we could do some kind of discussion among the students just about the air quality and what we could do. Maybe even about their masks and stuff like that.
Seems like a good idea. And one thing that's running through my head also is that in a maybe less than optimal way, this is also a really great educational opportunity, and it seems like a fantastic science elective for and back.
So, us eighth graders and a lot of high schoolers have the MESAC season coming up of sports, and there are a lot of sports in the MESAC season. So, would you suggest wearing masks for some sports more than others?
I wish I had a good answer about that. I'm sorry, it's not something I'm qualified to talk about. Yeah.
Just to build on that, does it make a difference at what time they train? Because one of the track training times is 6:30 to 8:30 in the morning.
So it seems like, if there's an opportunity to do this at 4 p.m., for instance, that's typically better than 6 to 8 a.m.
Just ask you, please,
is there anything sort of the government's doing or that you know about that would change the air quality significantly in any kind of way for the next two years or 3 years or so? Is it just going to be like this for the foreseeable?
So one thing that will take a long time to take an effect, but the government is actively working on, is a policy about cleaner vehicle fuels and cleaner vehicle emission standards. In the long term, this is super important because vehicles last a really long time. So the sooner this happens, the cleaner the vehicles become, the bigger the difference that this will make. But as you can imagine, this is an intensely political thing because car manufacturers have to negotiate how much they do make these changes and how quickly they can do it. There are things that the government can do relatively quickly if they wanted to put to really make a difference on the enforcement side of things. For instance, try to crack down on wood burning, for instance, and trash burning to make sure that during the winter time, we don't have these distributed sources of air pollution that actually are a significant percentage of the problem in many neighborhoods.
So I argued with the finance minister of India for about 7 years about why they don't reduce the quality of the custom duty on cars, which are zero emission, like electric cars and all. And his argument was that when we speak to people from BMW and Mercedes and all, they promised us, and since 2002 they have promised us that they will start manufacturing the cars which cause zero emissions in India, because my job is to protect some jobs, and that's my problem. I said, it's not fair that the rest of the country has to suffer this debate, and it's taken so many years and now the pollution has become worse. So there's got to be some give somewhere. I think that what I would suggest is, it's very difficult for people to openly start lobbying against literally, it's just so many people who are working in these, and they can come and stone your houses and all, right? So if all of us got together and started writing blogs about how it's 300%. If I want to buy myself one of these new cars, which is just, it can become like so reasonable, then everybody will stop buying the cars that are causing so much pollution. And that will also put pressure on the local manufacturers to quickly change their ways. But they're being protectionist and they're putting this 300% duty, and we just can't buy those cars in India. I don't know about the embassy rules, but like as Indians, it's very difficult.
Right, so I can comment about a few aspects of this. One is that the Chief Information Officer for Tesla was here earlier this week to speak at the Technology Summit. And one of the things that he stood up there on the podium and said is, we can't sell our cars in India right now because the import duties are too high. So from his perspective, we'd like to see those import duties come down because he sees a big market here. I talked to somebody in the Ministry of Heavy Industry yesterday, and they actually are really interested, and I think almost maybe more committed to electric vehicles than many agencies in the US. But their job is to promote domestic manufacturing. So they're actually investing a lot in trying to build the domestic capacity for building cleaner vehicles. And I think there really is very sincere, genuine interest with real money behind it to do that here. But again, it takes time, and I think the question about import duties is probably a very political one, as you would imagine. I'd also like to stress that it's not just about making sure that the newest cars are as clean as can be, but making sure that the old, really dirty cars come off the road, because one really old, bad car can have so much more impact than taking a already somewhat clean car and making it just a little bit cleaner, right?
Are the trucks in the developed parts of the world also like zero emission? I know about cars because...
So the trucks are a particularly big problem here. So I think that's one of the big opportunities for reducing pollution.
Sorry, I'm a European transport expert. In terms of trucks, it's more about actually the efficiency of how you use the vehicles rather than actually the engines that they're using. So there are lots of different statistics.
But also emissions controls, as we saw in the video.
Again,
right?
for car manufacturing, it's very negative to say that about electric cars. If you look at the difference between a new vehicle and an electric car, the differences are very, very small. So talk to some of the manufacturers and you'll get a different view on this, actually. Perspectives are a little bit wrong.
Yeah. What about the fuel pumps, the gas, the vapor that escapes?
So that may have some impact on ozone. It could have some impact on secondary PM2.5. But I would say that clean up the vehicles that are producing black smoke out of their tailpipes before you go after the fuel pumps.
I just want to add that in Delhi there is regulation that the cars older than 2000
right? So one thing that's a really important portion of vehicle emission controls anywhere in the world is making sure that in-use vehicles continue to stay clean and don't break, and that broken vehicles get fixed or taken off the road. And those provisions are not very strong here. Yeah?
So one thing that I would caution people about who are consumers of the air purifiers is that, and maybe you can speak to, what people should look for, but, HEPA can be thrown on pretty much anything. HEPA light, but really it's about how efficient the filter is at filtering out particles of 2.5 microns. And so, I looked at several different air filters, and they all said HEPA, but when you read the fine print, some of them said, it was 90% effective at removing particles that were 4 microns, or something like that. So, one thing that I think has to happen outside of this discussion is that people need to come to some standard agreement as to what HEPA really means. And consumers need to educate themselves on looking at the fine print of some of these air filters, because you could be misled, I think, in some cases.
Right. So, and also making sure that they perform well in Delhi-specific conditions.
Right.
Because the particles here may be different than elsewhere. I think this is where having a few portable instruments that people can trade around to see what works and what doesn't work can help move that discussion along really quickly. Yeah?
I just want a quick question on nuclear, and I don't know what the school does in terms of filters for the general assembly. I simply don't know. I don't know if there's a plan to put in purifiers for the assembly. Could you just address that?
Thanks. I don't know if you were able to hear the question from up front, but it had to do with venting and what we might be doing for indoor air quality. And I think there are some of you that have been trying to keep a close eye on that. And we did initiate this summer, actually, work on one of our buildings with new ventings, new filters. We had an expert come in and do, in essence, a survey, an audit of what our indoor air conditions were, which was not good. We made a decision through that to move ahead with making changes in buildings here. And I think you know that we started with the People Building, and that work has been concluded. We are in the process of trying to test to ensure that those changes have created improvements inside as opposed to outside. The initial evidence that we have is that it is indeed much better. And in fact, I think the last test will be taking place today. Is that right? Okay, I'm looking at Bhupesh and Jeff over there who are very involved with our efforts. And so it looks like we're having a final test by an outdoor agency to see how dramatic the changes might be from outside to inside in the People Building. Then our intent is to move, assuming that there are improvements there, our intent is to move ahead with other buildings on the campus, which is a sizable amount of money that's involved in that. But I think it's been mentioned several times by board members that there was money that was placed in this year's budget to move ahead with that. So there is reason to be concerned about indoor air quality. There's reason to feel better about that on campus in terms of us making some improvement, but we do have a long ways to go. And I think the other thing is, of course, is timing. If you have a little kiddo who's in 3rd grade now, I recognize that if we say, well, we're getting on it and in 8 months it'll be better, it doesn't help a whole lot, but that's really kind of the reality. But the short answer is the indoor air quality is of concern to us, and we're doing our best with the resources that we have to move ahead, and to move ahead when we have good research behind it. We want to make sure we're not spending a lot of money and it's, you can't support it. Okay. Did that help? Did it, Jeff?
Yeah, I just wanted to use that as a segue, that yesterday some of the testing that we were doing, most of the buildings don't have retrofitted filtration systems, but in the gymnasium yesterday, just one snapshot test, the PM 2.5 levels, not the AQI PM 2.5 levels, but the PM 2.5 levels were 108, whereas outside the gym were 421. So the